Hello and welcome, Star Wars players. We're here for the final confrontation of the 2024 OCS, the Online Championship Series between Matt Harrison-Trainor and Brian Fred. And I believe they are ready to go, so we'll just wait for them to post the game, and we will dive in. Matt gets to choose the side for Game 1 here in the finals, and I believe he's going to lead with Dark Side. And our table is up. And here we go. All right. So Matt is playing CCT. And Brian, I believe, is playing No Idea, which we will see in just a moment. So Matt and Brian, as we know, are teammates, but a lot of the discussions for deck selection of this came in private chats and various members of the team helping one another. So until right now, I wasn't sure what Matt was playing. So this will be an interesting matchup. Matt definitely has a lot of experience with both of these decks. I don't think Brian has played No Idea much in the last year, but he wanted a deck that had pretty much game against everything and is unlikely to lose by a lot. It also doesn't necessarily win by a lot. I believe that Brian has Guts in his No Idea list, which will obviously be beneficial against what presumably Matt will be playing with Scum and Villainy. All right, so we see the typical start from both players. Brian's got Insurrection, the No Idea Helper card, make 10 men feel like 100, and Walkling, and Matt's got the Any Method That's Necessary start for Boba Fett that'll allow him to teleport over to the audience chamber. And we are underway. Both players pull their grabber as expected. I think typically this matchup comes down to, can CCT disrupt in space? And ultimately, when Brian plays the beach, if he's able to sustain enough damage, and No Idea can amass a lot of power quickly on the ground. So Matt's going to have to pick his spots in terms of how he goes about fighting Brian here. He also has some liabilities in that he has both the Cloud City sites, so Brian can try to potentially go wide later in the game depending on how things progress. See the dungeon from hand. And while this game is setting up, I just want to confirm if somebody can put in the chat that you can hear me okay. All right, so Matt's going for his audience chamber, and obviously seeing what's in his deck, audience chamber comes out. Presume we'll see a Boba Fett go pick up Jabba's prize, put his gun on him, and then he'll play the free movement interrupt to move or teleport over to the audience chamber. Despair will definitely make it challenging for Brian to attack in the Jabba's Palace audience chamber, making all his rebels deploy +1. However, I have seen some replays from others in our team where CCT went light enough to the audience chamber that CCT, depending on how much they commit there and when Lightside has an opportunity, they may be able to actually get a beatdown off depending on how things shake up. But this tends to be a back and forth matchup. I think Guts will obviously help in terms of shutting down some of Matt's retrieval, assuming Brian's able to find it. I think he has a Don't Tread on Me in his list. So between that and Ray, and I think he has multiple resistance transports, so hopefully for Brian's sake, be able to find that quickly. All right, so Brian activates 9 already on turn 1. Goes for his Insurrection pull. I expect we'll just see Brian draw some cards this turn, unless he has a particularly good hand to establish something in space. Like if he has the Resistance Transport, Matt wisely pulled the shield that would make him pay 2 in order to deploy Ray. Unless we see that, I'd really be surprised if we see anything turn 1. It'll probably be play my Docking Bay, possibly pull the beach, and draw some cards. The beach can be tricky with No Idea in that you don't necessarily want to deploy it until you're ready to hold it. All right, so it looks like he is. I assume pulling it, yeah. It'd be surprising if he threw Tanev or some other ship up in space. So Brian prioritizes getting his activation online, wants to make sure the beach is there. It also might mean that he has a substantial number of characters in his hand and he's going to be ready to go. All right, so he does have the Resistance Transport and Ops to play at first turn. He may just be going fast, too, and saying, CCT, on your second turn, you typically want to set up. And I'd rather start searching my use pile, getting Ray online, and so that on turn 2 he can drop a couple characters to the ground, pick up Stardust, and start establishing 4 damage on his second turn. Sand is a big card for this matchup. CCT can potentially amass multiple Battle Destinies in space, so I'm sure that's a very high possibility what Brian pulled from his use pile, or he had an opening hand and just felt comfortable going to space and getting whatever free card. Typically, No Idea will play 1 to 2 Rebel Barriers as well, so he may just feel comfortable throwing that out there, especially with a barrier in hand, knowing Matt can't necessarily profitably attack him. All right, so Matt's turn 2 here, he's getting 11 force and yet 1 save, so he'll have 12 to work with. I would be somewhat surprised if he opts to drain. Matt's not huge on paying to drain for 2, especially early in the game. He likes to prioritize his resources and getting more cards in play or cards in his hand, but we'll see. Yeah, so he goes straight to deploy. He's going to pull Scum. And it looks like it's in there. Matt's just taking his time to ascertain what all is available to him in his force pile and what's in his deck. If he's able to download Dero into IG-88, he'll want to probably get that online so that he can start his force pile searches every turn. I'm not super experienced with streaming, and I'm going to attempt to get the Twitch chat. I thought I had it up and displaying, but it doesn't seem to be showing on the screen. So we'll see if this got it to work. And if not, I'm not going to worry about it. It'll be interesting to see how much space Matt is playing as well. I've seen some of the lists that only have as few as 2 ships, so the Slave 1 and typically Ellis and Hinthra. But I've seen other builds of this that have upwards of 5 or 6 ships. I know Werfs and some of the Endor guys seem to prioritize playing a lot of space in their CCT, and that probably helps in this matchup considerably. The other option is that he really doesn't contest Scarif and just tries to stay alive in space and fight on the ground. So we'll see which route Matt navigates based on how stout his space fleet is. Matt tends to be a pretty methodical player as well, so I'm not surprised to see him taking a good amount of time on his turn to think. Hopefully we don't see him use too much time and end up with another decision timeout like is what happened a few years ago. So he does go straight to space. Notably, his starting interrupt puts the slave one in hand, so Brian knew he has access to at least that ship right off the bat. And Brian does have the barrier. So I would bet he either picked that barrier or the sand off of his ray pole. All right, Matt opts to grab the barrier, which I think is a totally reasonable grab here. All right, so Matt has a bigger space fleet. We'll see if he has Guri to go with that Stinger. Notably, with Brian having sand, obviously that would stop the Battle Destiny through 2 battles if he does have Guri, but then it'll be a one-sided sand for Matt. And so Brian does opt for the shield to at least make Matt pay 2, and he does have Guri. So a good start for Matt in terms of him piecing his space together off of not too many cards drawn. And here comes Mithrandu. I don't know exactly how to say that guy's name, but the alien Thrawn. So Brian's going to be able to pull a ship from his deck next turn. Rogue One is stuck on on sand, and so I think the only ships that Brian has other than Rogue One are Tantive 4 and Han Chui and the Falcon V. So Brian's going to activate 12. He can't pull Han Chui Falcon. He's probably got to hope that the Tantive 4 is in his deck. I assume we'll see him draw a card with Ray, search for a docking bay, and then decide what options do I have. The good news for Brian is that the Resistance Transport does move like a starfighter. So if he isn't able to put a counter force up here in space, he at least has the option to retreat down to the beach. And notably, Brian drew very few cards last turn as well. He's got an 8-card hand, so he may not have a ton of options. He could be at the whim of his deck to some extent here. All right, so Tantive was not active. He's able to pull that from deck. Use him with 9 force, 8 in hands. I expect he'll have at least a few pilots. I don't know that Brian even really cares to battle. I think he's likely just going to stack his ships, pass the turn, force Matt to commit additional resources and time to fighting him in space. But until you see like Han Chui Falcon or something that's going to substantially outpower what Matt has here, I don't think battling really behooves Brian at all. And Van Willard comes down, which I believe you have to have Stardust on your spy. Yeah. So until he picks up that Stardust, he's just basically a vanilla guy. And as expected, Brian just draws some cards and passes. All right, I'm doing one more test to see if I can get this Twitch chat to show up, and then I'm formally giving up. My pleasure, Blake. Thanks for being here. All right, so Matt no longer has to pay to drain. Drains for 2. And we see Brian lose a Tidoo from hand, Hoojix from deck. And then Matt plays Artillery. And we see Perimeter Scan come up from Brian's use pile. Tidoo from hand tells me Brian must have potentially the second Tidoo already in hand. He's one of the better random characters in No Idea. Matt's down to 6 cards, so I think he's still got 2 passenger slots to work with on Boba Fett. Yeah. So the question will be, what, if anything, can he add to space? Brian caught the Imperial Artillery. Thanks for noticing that. I was messing with the Twitch chat, which I seem to have gotten to work, which is great. Yeah, so Barrier is grabbed for dark side, and Artillery is grabbed on light side. You see Matt come down with Proxima, which is always something good to get on the table early. Allows you to potentially generate some card advantage by adding additional aliens to your hand. It also just helps reinforce the site. This is kind of that situation I was saying before, that Matt has to at least have enough in the audience chamber to stop Brian from potentially just coming down there with a bunch of his random guys. Even though Brian, if he did that now, obviously Matt hasn't transferred the captive, he'd be able to cancel 1 battle. But I don't anticipate Brian will go there. I think it's much more profitable for him later in the game to try to spread to the Cloud City sites and just try to do as much damage as possible. All right, so Matt just plays Proxima this turn and then goes straight to draw. Notably, so Brian has Torn Far active, which she is piloting Leia's resistance transport. So Brian's total battle destiny is +2, and then he can retrieve any of his guys that he forfeits from that location once per battle. So, if Brian and Matt had battled there into him, Brian likely would have just forfeited Willard to the use pile, pulled a card off sand, and not enough would have been accomplished. I anticipate this will be the turn where we see Brian potentially go to ground. However, his hand is not that big, so depending on how many guys he has, he needs to make sure he has enough to really withstand any kind of attack back from Matt, likely at the beach. So it's possible, depending on his hand, we may see 1 more guy to space and draw some cards. Matt activates with his carbon chamber console. All right, so Brian is opting for going to ground. We see the No Idea specific Jin. She adds a battle destiny while Stardust is on your spy, and if it's on Jin at a battleground, force strain +1 here. So, as I predicted, he does have the additional Tidoo in his hand. Tidoo draws him the bottom card of his use pile. That's one thing with this deck, is I was saying he has a small hand, he lost the Tidoo, he probably has the other one, is these they're called cantrips in Magic, but these cards that replace themselves can really help in terms of what you're able to deploy. All these guys are cheaper because of make 10 men feel like 100. So for very few force and not that many cards, Brian's going to have a fairly substantial force here on Scarif. So I expect we'll see Tidoo pick up the Stardust, bring it over. Eventually it'll transfer to Jin to add to the drain. We also see Leia come down. I believe she really only does things against Imperials. Yeah, since she's not alone, if there was an Imperial, if somehow Mithrandu ends up down there, she'll be adding a Destiny to total power of attrition. Notably, Brian also comes down with Luke Skywalker V in space, so he's going to start his retrieval one a turn there, and he reinforces with Cassian to the beach. Another good thing for Brian in that he lost that Taidu is now that he's flipped, he has access to the flip side of his objective, and Cassian is now live. Yep, and so Mitt targeted Taidu, forcing Brian to lose a force when he moved him over to the beach. That will probably be one of the only times that Brian ends up having to eat a force to that, because I anticipate largely from now on he'll be placing guys directly to the beach if that's where they end up fighting. I feel like if you're Brian, you've got to be pleased with your position here, given the start that Matt had. Brian hasn't had the opportunity to draw all that many cards, and he still has a good force on both theaters. He's now threatening a Drain of 2 and a Stardust Ping and a retrieval from Luke. Matt is draining 2 a turn here in the audience chamber. Proxima is live. We do see Brian lose a Han Chewie Falcon from hand, which tells me he potentially... We talked about cutting Where's Han and just playing 2 Han Chewie Falcons, so I think it's possible he went for that option. And if he's losing that from his hand, it tells me he must already have the other one in hand as well. I'm going to see if I can pull up his list. I think I have it. Yeah, so he did go with double Han Chewie Falcon. So him losing that from hand definitely tells me he has the second one. I'm not sure I love losing that even in that scenario, though. Because there could be times later in the game where you end up needing to potentially forfeit it, or if Matt plays now Hutta once he's lost things in space and wants to run around. Like, sometimes you just want to have that insurance policy in your hand. All right, so Matt now has IG-88 online, or will in his move phase when he transfers the captive, and did not have to use his audience chamber poll, I don't believe, for Proxima. So that is live if he ends up wanting to pull Erica or something similar later in the game. He has that option. All right, so he transfers the gun from Boba Fett over to IG, and I anticipate we'll see him throw the captive, and then he'll start tunnel vigiling. And Matt already has an 11-card hand, so I'll be interested to see if he does anything else here in his deploy phase. All right, so he's opting to spread out preemptively to Cloud City, start amping up his damage. Brian also only has a 5-card hand, so P59 feels fairly safe there. I think Matt also knows late game those sites could be a liability for him, so he wants to get some amount of force on Cloud City so that Brian doesn't just opportunistically drop down there and start draining. I feel like this game is very likely to take a lot of clock from both players. So hopefully you guys are in for the long haul. I would not be surprised to see this go on for quite a while. depending on the way this game goes too, I mean, I was talking about Brian potentially going wide. I see Ryan in the chat saying, I don't hate where CCT is right now. If he's able to find Afra or something and establish something in the Yavin 4 War Room and start doing additional damage, that would potentially speed this game up, but also obviously be advantageous for Matt. So it'll be interesting to see if he prioritizes doing so. It's not too difficult for him to piece that together. But yeah, they're each doing 3 a turn. They're each retrieving 1 a turn. We see Jango Fett join up in space. I think this is a turn where Brian will commit. If he has the other Han Chewie Falcon, I anticipate that will come down in space. Then the question is, like, how much more, if anything, does he want to commit in space, and when will he start battling, hoping to start retrieving more by drawing his spies through Make 10 Men? All right, Matt takes the card to Force from Force Pile in the hand. Brian goes ahead and drains for 2. We'll see what Matt loses here. Thanks for the subscription, Timo. Dylan, just a plug while we're watching here. If you haven't used your subscription and you have Amazon Prime, you get a free monthly sub through that, and all of your subs benefit the PC, so thank you. And there are prize rewards based on length of subscription too, so check that out in the forums if you have not been subscribing. That's probably free swag that you're missing out on. Oh, yeah, so Brian just made a mistake also by draining before transferring the Stardust. So that cost him a damage. I believe. Yeah. And he retrieves with Luke and gets back the Han Chewie Falcon. And Wedge, Red Squadron Leader, comes down for Brian, which not the best combo necessarily with Sand. However, between that and Han Chewie Falcon, Torn Far, I think Brian's totally fine with Matt drawing 2 Battle Destiny and him canceling 1 and then sending one of his guys back to use. Because he's outpowering him by 10 plus whatever the Power Destiny is and his Destiny versus what will ultimately be 1 Destiny for Brian. If I were, for Matt, if I were Brian, I would not be prioritizing taking things out Sand. But yeah, that's a fair point that Matt would have probably pulled Resistance, but at least then you're forcing him to shield bust. Oh. Apparently Luke is not Red Squadron, which I was unaware of. Seems a little counterintuitive. As many things in this game can be. All right, some good guy Matt is allowing the revert, and Brian will battle and take a card off Sand, which I assume will be the Rogue One. So on a subsequent turn, he'll be able to play Rogue One, get a pilot on there, and that will activate Wedge. Notably, also, I just said he was up 10 power. He's actually only up 7 power because of Despair. All right, so Brian draws Ezra for his Power Destiny. Make 10 men is just for any destiny. So Brian can opt to retrieve off of this. We see Matt play Dark Time to subtract 1 since he's unable to modify the destiny. Gets a card back in his deck. And he can likely pull it again later if he thinks he's going to need it. That card doesn't have a ton of utility in this matchup. Brian does opt to retrieve, not surprising. And draws the Chad Bro for Battle Destiny, and his Soul Battle Destiny is 5 because of the modifiers from Torn, Far, and Ray. And MHT draws a 4. So I anticipate we'll see Brian forfeit probably Willard. Yeah, Willard to use Svile. Torrin should be able to rescue him, I believe. Yeah. And then Brian still has... He'll have 2 Force active, assuming he opts to retrieve. So he'll be at most 7 cards at the end of this turn. Probably 6 with 1 active, knowing he can draw it with Ray if it comes to that. All right, Matt's got 9 battle damage and 5 attrition. And so Brian's in a position now where he's going to be outpowering him by a fair amount in space. I expect we'll see Matt lose Jango Fett and maybe a few cards. Depending on his hand. I mean, he may lose 2 characters, but... Alright, so he does opt for 2 characters and he loses Wolf as well. Wolf not doing much for him there. Doesn't he have to be... Oh, I'm misremembering. So he was subtracting 1 for the Destiny. So Brian can't be too upset to see Wolf go to the bin. And Brian draws 1 and passes turn back to Matt. All right, so we're on turn 5. Matt's sitting on just under 30 minutes on his clock. Brian's about 4.5 minutes ahead of him. And we'll see drains of 2 and 1, and then a retrieval of 1 for Matt. We see the Endor Command team off the top, and Willard as well. And then Roos got Melshi from reserve deck. Brian's lost a fair number of characters, which is potentially good and bad. Obviously, it gives him plenty of things to target with his objective. But at the same time, he needs more characters to potentially put more pressure on. So we'll see if he's able to amass those. We see Matt pulls Dr. Chelly, Lana, whatever her name, Afra, off of his Proxima pull. And if he has a Gick in his hand, like, I would not be at all surprised to see him just start spamming some stuff on the ground, going to the Yavin Foresight to try and amp up his damage as well. He also may decide that it's worth just playing Nal Hutta and giving away Scarif in space. I don't think that long-term this space situation is particularly profitable for Matt. Here's the retrieval of Wolf. Yeah, all right, so he opts for Probot to the 2-0, which I really like this combination between that and Shizor. It's going to be challenging for Brian to fight through Shizor alone. Not to mention, if he were to clear him out of the site, Chelly can just come back and get that Probot right back into his hand. And then Matt does have additional space, so my potential line of running to Nal Hutta is not happening. So we see the Space Cruiser come down, and I believe he can download something onto that. Yeah, so an alien leader. I'm not sure with Mitt out there and Shizor out there if he would have any leaders back. Yes, Justin. You can shuttle up or down with the no idea objective on his turn. So he could fly Leia up to turn on the attrition destiny in space. Does Brian know that he can do that? 50-50. All right, Duro comes up in space. So Matt's just throwing up whatever forfeit fodder he can. If Brian does realize he can move Leia up, this could be a potentially big turn for him. If he can somehow manage to knock Matt out of space, he'll be in much better shape. So Matt does pull resistance. Mitt targets the data vault. And Brian... we'll see if he understands that he is able to do that and if he opts to. Matt goes for his force pile pull. All right, so he does use the no idea objective. Let's see what option. So he opts to instead have Jin move to get drains of 2 and 2 instead of potentially shuttling up Leia for the attrition destiny. This is game 1, and Matt got to choose sides. All right, so he gets drains of 2. We see He's No Good to Me Dead, Blaster Controls, Aura Sigma Blaster, and Dark Time go to the bin. And then a Stardust ping gets an Accelerate. Brian's going to retrieve Drone Web. So Brian's right now representing, he's doing 4 a turn and retrieving 1, and Matt's doing 5 a turn and retrieving 1. So Brian's slightly behind in the race, and I believe has more cards on the table. This is unlikely to be a large win for either side, so most of this match will likely come down to the outcome of the second game, which I believe is also going to be tomorrow at this time, so around 3 p.m. tomorrow. All right, so Lieutenant Blount comes down on Rogue One. Here comes Guts from Brian, so notably Matt's Scum Retrieval is now turned off. In between, he's going to be up 6 power plus the Destiny, and he'll just, again, potentially cycle somebody with Torrent Far, although I don't know if he's going to want to lose that Blount, so we'll see what Brian opts to forfeit. He obviously will not be considering losing Han Shui Falcon, given that he's got Guts online now. He also could have potentially shuttled Cassian up and used Cassian's cancel text and Wedge's cancel text to stick Matt with no battle destiny here and outpowered him by a substantial amount. As I noted, Brian has lost a lot of characters, so I'm not surprised to see him draw some relatively decent destiny here. So his total battle destiny is 8 plus a 4 for power, so that gets him to 43. Matt draws a 7, which assuredly is going to be canceled by Wedge. And his other destiny is a 4. So we're going to be down 14 power here for Matt. With 8 attrition, Brian's got 4 attrition to satisfy. He does lose the Blount, and then he's going to send him back to the use pile. I think his plan here is just if there's almost no chance that Matt's going to initiate battle in space, so he knows he can just get another pilot on that Rogue One on his turn and continue to battle if Matt doesn't end up deploying Now Huda and running. So Matt forfeits Guri and still has 7 additional battle damage left to satisfy. Which 7's not a great number for him. I think Duro is 3 forfeit. 4 forfeit. The Stinger is also 4 forfeit. Mitt's 6, I think, and the Space Cruiser 6. So 7 is like 7 after Guri is just a little awkward for him. He's got to lose 2 things, or lose a guy in multiple 1 in 3-ish cards. All right, and we see him opt for Duro and Stinger. And the Space Cruiser and Slave 1 do have enough hyperspeed to make it to Now Huda if he opts for that. So we'll see Brian retrieve Blount off of the Torn Far. I expect we'll see Cassian move in with Jin. But maybe Taidu. Alright, so Taidu it is. He's not upset if Taidu dies, since he also will draw him a card. And then this is the turn where Brian's at least going to restock his hand a bit. He knows he's going to eat 5 damage on his turn. And he needs to have a plan for how to navigate his subsequent turns. I would be really surprised if Matt doesn't play Now Huda move away now. Which notably, I believe Tana Fortress Hyperspeed 3, as is the transport. So, alright, so Brian is actually opting to move everyone in, it looks like. And I guess he'll just do this shuffle, basically. Which does limit the number of cards he's able to get into his hand, but also doesn't open him up to much beatdown. Brian probably wisely taking the conservative line here. I'm interested to see on Matt's turn if he then takes a chance to put some guys at the beach, knowing Brian's unlikely to have that much with which he can come fight him, even if he moves his Jin over. All right, so drains a 2 at the War Room. Honshui and Falcon goes again. Second copy of Ray goes. So Brian's not upset to see either of those. Bad Destiny, and they're both on table. Escape Pod combo. And then another drain of 2. All of that came from deck, and he continues to lose from deck. Another transport and Churret. Brian's down to 13 in life. Matt's sitting on 19. And they have 6 and 7 in hand, respectively. So Matt's ahead in cards and slightly ahead in the damage race. But No Idea, this is almost always how games with No Idea go. You end up with a lot of things on table, you lose a lot of force, and then you start stabilizing and potentially coming back and retrieving through battling, through Luke, through Torn Far. The deck is very resilient if it's able to set up and push into the long game. And Tashi Station with a 67-month subscription. That's impressive. Yeah, Blake comments he'd like to see Brian get out projection. I don't believe Brian has a projection, which I'm sure he's not thrilled about at this juncture. Matt hit Hondo off of his Proxima pole. So far he's net 3 characters off Proxima that came out on turn 3. That's 100% success rate, so you got to be happy with that. And now he's tunnel visioning. All right, Matt gets his retrieval, gets back the Stinger. I would be very surprised if we see that return to battle in this game, but you never know. And there is the Now Hutta, so you got to imagine he's conceding the Scarif system, knowing I got you to commit a lot of resources there, and I'm not paying to drain, I'll move away. Like I said, the question here is where, if anywhere else, does Matt spread this turn? If I'm him, I'm going to try to get potentially that Shelly out or someone to a docking bay, or try to get a substantial force onto the beach, knowing that Brian moved away, and then you can contest that site and block the drain of 2. We'll see what line Matt opts for. All right, so there's Chelly to a docking bay. Chelly will get him back Guri. So maybe I spoke too soon about the Guri and the Singer. We'll see. It at least gives him an insurance policy if Brian decides to split his forces in space. And I wouldn't be surprised if Brian ends up, instead of splitting forces, maybe he ends up landing some of his guys onto Scarif. All right, so Matt's doing a little bit of both of what I was suggesting. So we see Zuckuss come down. Zuckuss with Snare Rifle along with Forlom. So Forlom adds a Battle Destiny with Zuckuss. This Zuckuss says you can peek once per game at the top card of any deck. His weapon can target a character for free and excluded from battle if Destiny greater than target's power. Interesting. I can say I have never deployed this card. With that said, obviously Brian's objective gives him some weapons protection. Brian plays, he says he needs an action, I skipped it, then Matt plays Hondo, and all right, Brian plays until he's maneuvered to pull Bodhi into space. So no need for a revert, Brian still had a deploy phase action. Thankfully for Matt, there's no light side gravity shadow to punish him for moving away. And I think Matt's got to be pretty content with where he's sitting right now. He's got a fair amount of damage set up, and he's got Brian's resources stacked at 2 sites. This is a very substantial turn for Brian for how the rest of this game is going to go. I think he's got to really honestly start thinking about how to protect his differential and grind Matt down as low as possible. All right, so he gets drain a Scarif. Matt loses artillery off his deck. Drain a 2 at the data vault because of Jin, and we see Imbalance and Woof go off the top, and now the Stardust damage is getting Utagudo solo from deck. Brian's going to retrieve the Resistance Transport off of Luke. So Brian has a sand pole left. So it'll be interesting to see, like, he has the option of potentially... He's opting to use his objective now to move Jin Urso. I'm not totally sure why he would do that now. He lost Churret. So it's not like he needed to necessarily do it in control phase, because I don't see a way for him to recirculate. What I was trying to say is, before he surprised me with that play, is like he could land his Resistance Transport and then potentially move. He could dock Rogue One with Tantive 4 and then land the Resistance Transport and move Rogue One and have Wedge on the Rogue One and move Rogue One and Han Chui Falcon over to now Hutta to block that train. But then he's still facing 2, 3, 4, 6 on the ground. And with 4 cards in hand, you can't imagine that he has much to block. Yeah, I mean, putting the guy out of play does make Taidu slightly better. To subtract from Destinies. I don't know. It's not a move I would have made. So Horn comes down in front of P59. Which tells me, well, obviously Brian has the objective text on his turn to stop the weapon shot, but he also probably has a sabotage in hand, so he's safe at both of those sites, at least from the weapon. All right, Chad comes down to the data vault. He adds Destiny to power, I think. With a Stormtrooper or Rebel Leader, adds Destiny total power, and he can subtract 1 from a interrupt or weapon Destiny targeting a non-Jedi Rebel. And he's deploy 1 forfeit 5 thanks to the 2 effects, which is obviously a good ratio. Sam points out that it also lowers the number of cards in Brian's lost pile, which for match play is consequential. I mean, if Brian's already thinking ahead to, I need to get as many cards out of here as possible, I would be surprised, but you never know. All right, Taidu comes over, and I expect we'll see Cassian come over. And then he can leave Leia and Chad there, and he's got a leader to add that doesn't need the power, and he feels relatively safe at that site, I imagine. However, it's only now drains of 1 and 1 for Brian, assuming the Corran Horn gets killed on Matt's turn. So Brian's damage has been shut down fairly substantially, and he's going to have to use pretty much a minimum of 3 force to do the moves I was discussing to get 1 to ship dock, 1 to fly each ship over. So Brian's just already pretty precariously low on force here. So Rogue One goes, and I expect he'll move Han Chewie Falcon as well. Yep. And now it's going to be a bit of a cat and mouse game in space. We know Matt has Guri in hand, so I'll eat my words when I said we probably won't see that Stinger come back a few turns ago. Now I fully anticipate we will. Brian now opts to move Corran Horn, which he could have just deployed him directly there. That's an odd bit of sequencing and decision making. All right, so Matt activates it all. Not interested in fighting. Happy with his board position. He's going to push through 5 damage here and a retrieval. And then I expect we'll just see him move around. So we see another Jin off the top. Don't tread on me. Lieutenant Blount, Saw, and a Sabotage from deck. So Brian's now down to 10 in deck and 2 in hand. Matt's sitting on 14 in life and 5 in hand. And he's now going through for Tunnel Vision. So Matt will either probably block the Corran Horn Drain. He could just have a Gana Gleamort. I don't love that. Or he could just slide P59 over. But moving P59 is definitely the worst option because Brian can just use his objective to move Corran Horn back to the Carbonate Chamber on his turn and still get a drain in. I think in an ideal world, Brian would have been able to go to Cloud City with 2 characters so that he can make sure that he's shuffling around and getting 2 damage through each turn. All right, so Matt retrieves the Utaguda solo. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Matt throw a guy or so up in space and then move them to Scarif and then see how he handles the Corran Horn. But the math is in his favor, and so I think he's just going to try and get Brian to have to use as much of his life force by deploying additional things so he can get more damage through and keep retrieving. I expect we'll see Matt will win this somewhere between 8 and 12 cards. So a reminder, as far as I know, game 2 of this match will be tomorrow at 3 p.m. I believe Dan and Garrett are available, but I could be wrong. I know that I unfortunately cannot stream this at this time tomorrow. All right, Zam comes down in front of Corin. So he's happily blocking that drain and not leaving the carbonite chamber exposed. Oh, Timo's got it tomorrow. Excuse me. So thank you, Timo, for being available. And probably with Justin Branch as well, if Justin's able to join in. EPP Mara joins at the beach. So that's Matt just beefing up his forces and also threatening another weapon. All right, I'm getting a lot of requests for the belt, so just bear with me for a moment. I think I know where it is. All right, the belt is on. Carl, Ryan, whoever else mentioned it. Happy to represent from a wonderful weekend that was Ohio Mega Worlds. Thanks again to Carl and Kendall and Travis and everyone else who put effort into putting on that extremely fun weekend. I'm hopeful in the in the spring, there will be a major in Columbus. It was a great time. Very walkable downtown. Highly encourage anyone able to attend if that major does end up happening in the spring. Get out there and play some Star Wars cards, meet some good friends. You will not regret it. All right, so that turn went about as expected for Matt in that he did play the Gurian Stinger and then move his space away. We see him target the Scarif Beach with Rondu. All right, so Brian's only going to be pushing 3 damage this turn, which is not where he wants to be, considering how much damage he's eating. See Greedo go off the top, and any methods necessary. And Dengar with Blaster. It's interesting deck choices by both of these players here. Like, neither of these have necessarily been the most popular deck in majors over the last few months. I know Matt really likes CCT and he's very comfortable with it, and it has game against most everything. The mains matchups can be dicey depending on how things go with the audience chamber. I think Brian chose No Idea largely for it's solid. It doesn't necessarily have a ton of terrible matchups, and it's likely to play most games fairly close. So knowing he was either playing Werfs or Matt, like the range of decks he had to prepare for potentially was extremely wide. So even if he ends up losing this game, I don't know that Brian would necessarily feel bad about his deck choice. So we see Ezra come down to block the drain of the Hop Docking Bay. We might even see him battle that Shelly. Since Greedo's gone, there's no chance of a react really to clear the site, and if he knows he has a spy on top, that's a way to at least retrieve a force. All right, there's the barrier from Matt. So that line will not be happening, but at least he is blocking the drain. And now I expect we might just see Brian move Core and Horn over in front of the P59, knowing he's safe with his objective text. Yep. He does exactly that. I don't know that Brian's going to bother making any moves in space. I anticipate we'll just see him draw a card and pass the turn. All right, he does move on Tree Falcon. I'm not sure how necessary that move was. Probably, I mean, obviously he doesn't want to lose Luke, and he would have been down a fair amount in power, so it's probably the safer play, but it allows, if I'm mad, I'm pleased. It's like it's one less card in his hand. All right, so we go to Matt's turn. Drains at the War Room. We see the transport and Antilles maneuver lost off the top from Brian. And Corporal Pau Gasol goes gone. Matt goes to use Proxima. Hits Mighty Jabba. I think he's got a 100% success rate still with Proxima. It's impressive. He's got 3 in reserve. I don't know that Matt even cares necessarily about battling at this point. So, like, if I'm Matt, I'm trying to ensure that really I'm limiting as much of Brian's damage as possible while getting through as much of mine as possible. But where we are right now, battling at the beach, I don't know that it accomplishes all that much. If this game were not match play, I'm sure Brian would have conceded considerably earlier. All right, I'm moving this belt so I don't have to keep holding on to it. Thanks again for the belt, Carl. Just a couple other reminders while we've got a little bit of dead air. Garrett is organizing a GEMP tournament for the Saturday after Thanksgiving, which you can sign up for online, which is Saturday, November 30th. I think it's $5 entry and start at like 10 or 11 a.m., probably 4 games, and I'll figure out some good prizes for the PC to throw in. So if you're free that day, feel free to proceed to play. There's also going to be online play week coming up sometime between now and the end of the year, so keep an eye out for that. There's likely going to be a Vegas major in January, and more details coming on that soon. I know that Chris has been working diligently to get all of that squared away, so just stay tuned. Hopefully those details will be coming shortly. All right, so here comes a Mighty Jabba with Chelly against Ezra. So he's greatly outpowered here, thanks to the bonus of 3 power from Despair. Matt draws a 5, so he'll be sitting at 14. Ezra only forfeits for 5, I believe. Yeah. So, So Brian will be able to retrieve 1 off 10 men here. But he'll be down 10 power. And I believe, didn't he lost his Hujix early in the game, so this could be 5 overflow. Yeah, so he's peeling. Notably, Matt's aliens are immune thanks to his objective, so both those guys are going to live. So that knocks Brian down to 4 cards in life and 1 in hand. I anticipate we will see Brian draw up on his turn. Because he's only pushing through 3 damage. And passing the turn back gives Matt another opportunity to retrieve. 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah. Actually, so Brian's on 5 total life force. Retrieval will get him to 6, and Matt's pushing 5 damage at the moment. So likely not. Actually, he may live for 2 more turns. Although Matt then could, if he has another artillery in his deck, potentially pull that. All right, so he goes to battle Corn Horn. Anticipate we'll see him use his objective to cancel the weapon targeting. But he, again, is far outpowered here. So it'll really come down to Destiny. All right, Matt's peeking at the top card of his deck using Zuckuss and draws a 4 for Destiny. So he's going to be power 11. And Brian is 4. He's got 5 forfeits, so he's a 4 or better. So the 5 will clear P59 as well. So they'll just trade. Matt's out of force, so he can't move Zam Wessel over to establish the drain back at the Carbonite Chamber. So I anticipate we'll see Matt pass the turn and then activate with his Carbonite Chamber, so we'll have that Imperial Barrier back on top, at least before Brian drains. Oh, so Dark Time actually to activate 1. And that will allow him to move the Zam. All right, so yeah, as expected, we see Matt move Zam over, and then he'll be passing the turn back to Brian. And it's looking like that 8 to 12 card win is probably going to be exactly in the sweet spot of where Matt pulls this one off. So Mithrano will target the Data Vault this turn. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. All right. So we see Brian move and then lose a force from use pile. And you've got to think this is he's going to drain, do his damage, just get another damage through and then drop. So it's probably 2, 3. Probably win by 10 for Matt. There goes the barrier. And yeah, fully, or 9 then, excuse me. Yeah, it'll be 9. I thought he had already drained it. Now how to, my bad. I guess Brian's just going for the game-ending battle here. That's the only explanation. I guess that's a more dramatic and fun way to go out than drawing up. And you see the GG from Brian there. So yeah, he's acknowledging the game is over. But this does, yeah, good point, Joe. This does put 2 extra cards in his loss pile. So that's an odd choice. Why not just draw up? Matt had no cards in hand or anything to recycle. There's no retrieval. So Brian's just doing this for giggles. But not that necessarily the best strategic choice when the tiebreaker is cards in lost pile. Sam's saying that Jin could have pinged. If just lost, opponent loses 1 force. Oh, that's interesting. But didn't he move Jin over to do the additional drain damage? So it's kind of a wash. All right, so Matt wins by 9 with 20 and lost, 25 and lost for Brian. Again, game 2 should be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 Pacific, I guess, 9 p.m. Europe. And Dylan, I believe, will be streaming potentially with his tag team partner, Silver Glen. Thank you all for joining in. And may the force be with you. I got to figure out how to stop the stream.